Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Broadrun podcast, where we're talking all things running, all things run coaching, and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So we're going to talk about a few different things today. And today we're going to be talking about something which I've been looking into and, I wouldn't say researching because it's not that deep, but just reading one of the sort of biggest coaches in terms of endurance space, Dr. Phil Maffetone. You've probably heard about it if you're in the sort of running endurance space, especially sort of Ironman stuff. A lot to do with the Maffetone method, which is his sort of own branded way of endurance coaching. So I just wanted to touch on it, what I think about it, what I've learned from his book. I've just been, sort of plowing through this, which I don't know if you can see, the Endurance Training and Racing by Dr. Phil Maffetone. I actually got this book from a public book stand, which was free, and I just seen it and thought, you know what, I'm really interested. I picked up the book about 2 years ago. It sat on the side, along with all the other courses and stuff I've been doing, just never had a chance to sort of pick it up and go through it. And then over the last couple of weeks, I've just been slowly going through it. There's a lot of information to take in. There's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I don't, necessarily 100% subscribe to, but, I think it's really, really good. And I think it's probably like a great sort of base plan for somebody who's going to sort of do it. I also have taken in this book as sort of a step-by-step basic plan for you to follow. So one of the first things that it gets you to do is go out and carry out what's called a max aerobic function test, so MAF test. I actually thought that at the start that this was short for MAF, like Maffetone, as his name, like as he sort of describes. That's not actually the case. It's max aerobic function test. So the whole purpose of this test, it can be done across any sort of aerobic endurance sport. You can break down the test. It can be done in a couple of different ways, but the way that I did it is you do 3 mile tests, with a break in between at your sort of max aerobic function, which he sort of describes. I'll go into a bit of how he describes what you should determine as that. So he uses instead of using the traditional 220 minus your age to find out your max heart rate, what he gets you to do is do 180 minus your age, and then use a little calculation to find out. So this is off the top of my head. So it's like if you have had lots of injuries or you're sort of massively aerobically unfit, you add another 10 to what you take away from your age. So if my age is 30, you add another 10, so 40. So you would be working at your maximum aerobic heart rate of 140. For me, I thought I might as well just like give this a proper go and see what it's like. So I did the one where it was +5, which it had meant that I'd been training not aerobically for, I'd been doing lots of anaerobic stuff. So I added an extra 5 in, which took me to a max aerobic function heart rate of 145. So that would be my max for the test. So what I did was set out on the treadmill. One of the things that it says really important of this is to make sure that you're sufficiently warmed up. So I did about 20 minutes on the treadmill, just at really, really easy pace, slowly ramping up the pace so that eventually I was at my heart rate of 145. Towards the end, once I got to there at the sort of 20 mark, I knew that this test was going to be slow because of the pace that I was running on the treadmill, which I think sort of is one of the things I thought was really good. It's led me into a bit of an insight about my training. I then, did the 1 mile, which I've got marked down here. So I did it at 9:22 minute mile pace, which is around 5:40-ish pace, 5:45 per kilometre, which is not very fast at all, obviously even relatively speaking. And yeah, so I did that, and then I took a break of around 4 minutes walking, and then did another mile test, which came back at 9:32 or around 5:53, and then did the third, same break again, did the third one at 9:36. which is good because as the book describes, that means that I've sufficiently warmed up. It means that you expect your natural cardiac drift, so your heart rate will sort of tend to go up as you progress throughout the test. It sort of says if you expect to see, say if you got 9:35 and then 9:22 on the next one, then you sort of can say that you probably didn't warm up sufficiently. And obviously that's not the whole purpose of the test. So I've got this score, and then what you can do is take your math test against, they have a sort of benchmark like score, take your average across there, which for me was like 9:30. And then that does, it has like an equivalent, like a sort of 5K equivalent across a lot of different people, so they can sort of see where you are. Now, obviously, if you've recently done a 5K, you know whether this is correct or not. So I've recently done a 5K, and I found that the equivalent math that I did said that I was going to be around a 22-minute 40 5K, which is around 3 and a bit minutes slower than I could actually run a 5K. But obviously what this book says is, what that means is I am massively aerobically unfit, which means that sort of metabolically my aerobic system is massively underdeveloped, but my anaerobic system is probably really strong. Now, that does make a lot of sense for me because I have been doing, in this Dubai heat, I've been doing a lot of sort of track work, high aerobic stuff. I've been doing a lot of stuff with the high rocks classes, a lot of anaerobic work. And the aerobic base stuff that I've been doing on the bike has just generally not been probably sufficient to build like a decent aerobic base. When I'm coaching people, I always like to think of the aerobic base as like the bottom of a pyramid. So the bigger your aerobic base in terms of like, if you think of it as a big triangle, the bigger the base, that means the sort of, the higher you can go. So think of like the very peak is probably your potential peak on, say, like any given race. So say for me, it might be like a 17-minute 5K. If I build a bigger base, theoretically, I'll be able to build my peak of my pyramid higher. Now, I know it doesn't always work like that, but it's a good analogy to think about, the way you go. And you always try and build the base first. If you try and put the bricks on top of the pyramid before you build the base, then obviously it's not going to go very well, and you're going to really struggle. And yeah, that's, sort of what I thought it would be a good test for me to do to compare where I am. I thought I might probably come in a bit better. And, that's just obviously not happened. But what is, sort of led me to believe with my, big marathon goals coming up. For me personally, I'm definitely going to be looking into doing more sort of base work. I am going back to the UK in the next couple of weeks, which means that I'll be able to, start working on a bit longer base stuff. And I will be using this new math heart rate as my sort of new maximum zone 2. I do always say that the zone 2 should be done off effort. If you're able to do conversational pace, that's like a good indicator whether you're in that zone 2 pace or not. But, this has sort of really opened my eyes to maybe think, right, there's a lot of stuff you can do. I had recently done a VO2 max test where it came back and told me my results of my maximum zone 2 heart rate was 155, which is like, you can obviously have higher heart rates. And that's when the point where, my blood lactate becomes unsustainable and slowly starts to sort of build up. So it is this training methodology does have you training a good bit below what your actual zone 2 is, but I think that's quite good, especially for sort of aerobic events, especially stuff like the marathon, and for if someone was going to do like an Ironman distance event, I think that's really good. And the good thing about the math test and the math methodology is you can obviously apply it to your bike. You can apply it to any given exercise. So, if you've got your maximum heart rate for biking, you've got it for swimming, although you're probably going to find it very difficult to get up there. You can use it for, a Stairmaster, you can use it for hill walking, you can use it for anything. And I do think that's really cool that you can just sort of switch it across. This book then prescribes you to do sort of max aerobic intervals where you sort of work at that maximum pace for say 20-minute blocks. So you do a big warm up, get up to that heart rate, and then do say 20-minute blocks into that sort of space with around 145 beats per minute, and then sort of come back down, hopefully improving your aerobic efficiency at that level. Now, the thing that I've noticed just with obviously people that I'm coaching is one problem with doing that is we are sort of, especially in this like fast-paced city, is a lot of us don't have a lot of time. Time's probably one of the biggest constraining factors to people's training. So, you know, if I was to say to somebody, right, we're going to go out the weekend and do 4 or 5 hours at 130 BPM, someone probably doesn't have the scope to do that. If they've got to pick up their kids from, you know, classes, they've got to go and do something in the afternoon. You know, it just depends how committed you are to it. Obviously, that's something you have to factor in. And this is why I sort of don't 100% go with this methodology. You know, I sometimes think, not that you can shortcut, but if you're able to do sort of higher quality work, say around zone 3 heart rate, like above your sort of aerobic base, I think there's like definitely time and place for that. And, you know, I do think that's something worthwhile adding in. Also, you've got to factor in the sort of boredom factor of doing this kind of training, like sitting at 130 BPM for 4 hours on a bike is probably not the most fun thing, especially if you live in a city like Dubai, which we have like 4 cycle tracks. Most of them are just going around in a circle. So, you know, it's okay to go out for your coffee ride with your mates and, you know, sort of practice this. But if you were to go and do this 6-7 sessions a week, you know, I do think you'd probably very quickly find yourself getting bored with this type of session. But I do think that I do prescribe to the methodology of maybe 80%, 90% of your training should be this type of training anyway. And, you know, it is good to sort of go in and do it. I do still think that there is sort of time and place for anaerobic intervals. And it does actually say this. So if you actually follow a lot of the people talking about it on YouTube, on Instagram, they sort of come across, I'm not sure whether they misinterpreted the book or misinterpreted what he's saying, but effectively there's no reason why you can't do anaerobic training. It does actually say, it even has a whole chapter on what you should do. It should be something simple, repeatable, and it should be, you know, only at the point where you find yourself not progressing aerobically. So obviously, I'm going to retest my aerobic function in a month, and then I will see the results for that. So stay tuned. I'll definitely jump back on here and sort of say the results of what it's been and sort of what my training has looked like to get it down. And obviously, if it doesn't come down, then I'll probably look at reducing the amount of anaerobic work I'm doing, because I'm currently doing 2 sessions a week. One sort of mixed intervals, and then one on our track session on Monday mornings, which is definitely anaerobic work. But, you know, we will see. But I think, yeah, like I said, sort of a lot of people have been missing what he's been saying. You know, he doesn't say don't do it. He's only said don't do it if you're sort of metabolically unhealthy, if you're not sort of progressing in this sort of aerobic function test, then maybe you'll need to look at dialing it back. So I think that's something super important to take in. Where he's saying, you know, you need to just keep it to maybe maximum 1 or 2 sessions a week, just depending on your volume, obviously. One thing I will note is there's probably, having like looked into a lot of the biggest cyclists in the world, a lot of the biggest endurance athletes, specifically, you know, I follow like the Norwegian Method podcast, follow those guys, follow what they're doing in the training. A lot of these guys are not doing this type of training. I'm not sure whether the endurance world has like moved on from this. I do think that there's probably a lot of, you know, stuff to do. There's probably a lot of progress to be made. For like the general athlete, especially around their aerobic function. But if you look across the board, there's probably not a lot of people who are like prescribed this entire method. But, you know, I do think it's good to sort of take in and take a sort of piece of wisdom from it. I really do like his teaching in terms of around like the holistic approach to endurance training. So he's got a lot of good stuff in here in terms of speaking about whole food diets, and and then speaking about just the way you sort of can live to try and sort of reduce injuries. One of the biggest chapters on it actually is to do with reducing stress. Now, I see this a lot with some of the people that I coach, people who have, high flying office jobs, if they say work for big corporations and stuff, they're working maybe 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, they get assignment across their desk at 9 o'clock at night, and then they have to sort of work on it till 1, 2 in the morning, and then they come for 6 in the morning for training. And then if you look across what their sort of metrics are saying, their resting heart rate, their heart rate variability, which is something that I'll cover in probably another longer form discussion about what I think about it. But they'll probably see that those are massively spiked, and then what are they going to go and do? They're going to go and train. So their body's already in a stress state, and he sort of describes it as like an anaerobic state anyway. So if the body's already in that sort of state, and then they're going out to do more training, they're only putting more stress on, which is sort of leading them to a sort of spiral, which is leading people down the route of sort of sickness, unwell, bad health. So it's something to consider, if you've got the sort of stresses. I really like this actually, what he came up with. So what he did was he said, right, get a piece of paper. Anyone can do this now. Get a piece of paper, write on the top 10 things that cause you stress. So number 1, sort of late night assignments. Number 2, bad dietary, eating takeaway foods. Number 3, it could be anything, like cars breaking down. I don't know. It could be anything as random as that. But then you sort of go down and say, right, number 1 stressor, how do I reduce that? Or at least sort of come down, right, get the work done earlier in the day. I know it's not as simple as that, but, try and reduce each sort of one as you go. And I think that's really good. Obviously, if it's like your wife and kids or your husband and kids or something, then you're not going to want to try and cross them off the list. But, you can obviously work in ways of trying reducing what is the reason that's causing you stress. Okay, picking up the kids in the morning and taking them to daycares, one of the most stressful things I do, so I can't do training, right? Is there a way that I can organize lift share for them to go and do it so I can get a good quality training block in the morning? They can still get to school, and it means that I'm happy, come home and still be a more present parent in the evening. So I think that's it's probably something like a good sort of litmus test for you to think, what is actually causing me stress? And I really like it. And, it's one of probably the biggest takeaways, and probably a practice that I will get my athletes to do, especially when I see the metrics come in. If you're like an endurance athlete, you've been training for a long time, and then you look across your resting heart rate and say it's in the 70s. I've heard a lot of people say to me, I have a naturally high resting heart rate. Well, if that's fine, you probably need to go and speak to your doctor and get prescribed that. There's obviously not prescribed, sorry, get diagnosed. There's probably some sort of reason that it's up there. I find in most healthy trained individuals, they will find their resting heart rate reflective on their watch or wherever they sort of take it. If you have your Whoop band or if you have something like this, you will see it reflected. If you're aerobically fit, you will see your heart rate for ladies in the low 50s. For gents, it might be in the low 40s. You will see it reflected. If it's in the 70s or 80s, it's probably because you have a high sort of stress. And that might be something, like he says in the book, it might be something that might be coming from, too much anaerobic work, not enough aerobic endurance, and then it might be coming from something else, an external stress, or it might be money worries, it might be, family problems. It's just something that you probably have to address, and probably something you have to address before you think about taking on serious training, especially something for a marathon or an Ironman type event where it's going to cause you a lot further stress. So I think that's important to note at this point, is this kind of training is putting a physical and mental stress on your body, and effectively that is what's causing your adaptations for your body to get fitter and healthier. It's your body wants to be in homeostasis. It wants to stay the same. And the only reason we get fitter is because we apply stresses like, sort of aerobic endurance workouts, lactate threshold workouts. And this is why our body makes adaptations. We push our body up to the sort of lactate threshold, and then our body becomes more efficient at working at that lactate threshold, and therefore we get fitter. It doesn't just get fitter because we're doing like random things. There's method to the madness about why it gets better. So it's important to remember that. But if you're able to reduce the amount of stresses that happen out with your life, means that you're able to put more into training and then also probably get better. So I think that's a lot of good takeaways from there. I'm definitely going to apply these workouts. I have been doing a lot of zone 2 training, especially on the turbo trainer and the bike stuff just ahead of T100 triathlon, which I'll be doing in November. I just want to come into that looking at a real good base. So I think that's sort of everything that I wanted to cover on there. I will come back in a sort of month or so with the new test results. So see if I can beat my 9:30 average on that test. Now I know that's not the best, and you're probably, if you're into math training and you've probably seen it, then you're probably laughing, going, "That's rubbish! Like, you're supposed to be a coach." But we are where we are, and we tested, we test again. That's the theory of all sort of endurance training: test again, race again. Train, find out what worked well, find out what worked badly. So do that and then sort of keep progressing. But if you've got any sort of tips or hints on the sort of math method, and if it's something that you've been doing yourself, and if you think that I've been chatting absolute nonsense, then obviously leave me some comments and tell me if you think that that's what I've been doing. And then join me on the next episode where I'm going to be talking about going to do a little test on this homemade beetroot that I've been doing. So hopefully that will be something interesting. If you've not heard about that, then tune into the next one and see what you think. Okie doke.